All right, well, I think we'll get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining from today. My name is Laurel Grodman, and I'm Assistant Dean of Admissions at the Yale School of Management. I'm also a graduate of the LSOM MBA class of 2006, and I am excited to have some time with you today to talk about a very specific portion of our application process, namely our resume and work experience sections. So appreciate you joining today to learn more about completing this aspect of the application. I hope you'll find it useful. And we have, I think, about 45 minutes or so together, during which we will kind of quickly go through an overview of the application process so you have a sense of where this piece that we're focusing on today will fit in. And then, as I said, we'll dive deeply into both the resume and the work experience section of the application. I'll provide hopefully some useful tips on completing both of those aspects of the application and what you can do to prepare your best application more generally. I'll open up the application itself and go line by line through the work experience section so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And then when we are finished with going through these sections, I will be sure to leave plenty of time for Q&A, where you can ask any questions that you might have on the areas that we covered, or questions specific to your candidacy as you are thinking about these sections. So if you wouldn't mind just holding your questions until the kind of formal presentation part of this is completed, then I will be sure to be able to get to as many of those as possible. And so with that, so as I mentioned, again, the focus today will be on the resume and the work experience sections of the application, but I do think it's helpful to give you a brief overall sense of how we are assessing candidates for the Master's in Asset Management program, so you can think about how this fits into your application as a whole. So the evaluation process for this program, we're really looking for three things at heart: your academic preparedness, with a particular lens of assessing your quantitative preparedness. It's a highly quantitative program, and we want to make sure we are setting you up for success once you enter the classroom here. We're looking at your professional impact and potential as demonstrated through your work experience, your extracurricular involvement, and personal interests. So that's the part that we'll be taking a special look at today. And then more broadly, your desire to make an impact in the field of asset management, both immediately after graduating from the program and then beyond within your career. And so all of the different application elements that you see here in front of you really aids the admissions committee in our assessment of one or more of these dimensions. Some of them give us information about several of these areas. Some of them are really focused, but we look at them holistically and we pull the information that we need given each of your own unique academic histories and professional experience and personal backgrounds. And what this means ultimately is that there isn't one ideal candidate profile for the asset management program, but rather that our students can come from a variety of different academic and professional backgrounds and find success within the program. Please note that our application deadline is coming up just a little over, or just a little under actually, a month from now, so January 9th, and then we will release all admissions decisions on March 27th. And so with that, let's turn specifically to the resume aspect of the application. All right, so just a second. So when it comes to assessing your professional impact and potential, so that second area that I shared that we focus on, we are really meeting you where you are. So some of you are going to be coming directly from your undergraduate experience, and so necessarily you will have no full-time work. But that doesn't mean that you haven't had an opportunity to gain applied experience in different ways. So you've likely engaged in professional internships or academic research. You've probably done some extracurricular activities or pursued, personal interests. So that is fine. That's the suite of activities that we are going to look at for you. If you do have full-time work experience, you're going to want to highlight those experiences in your resume. Again, I like to think of this program as an early career program, but what that really means is early in your asset management career. So if you have gotten experience, full-time experience in another field, but you're looking to make a pivot, we're still interested in understanding the work that you've had and how you've performed in a professional setting in that other context. And if your interests and pursuits outside of finance or other quantitatively focused activities, is a component of your application, we're interested in understanding that as well. Even in the most quantitatively focused asset management roles, your ability to think strategically, to connect the dots across industries or different disciplines, and to communicate and collaborate with colleagues will be critical. So we're interested in seeing where you commit your time and how you operate and interact within a variety of settings. So in other words, we're not just expecting you to already have lots of experience in finance and be able to share that information. Again, we're thinking of this as an early tier asset management career program, and so expect to see a wide range of really differentiated experiences coming into it. All right, so thinking about the components of the application that help us get a sense of these things. So first, we're going to look at the resume. So the resume is obviously a very important part of your application. It should showcase in a clear and concise way your academic experience, your professional experience, and again, broadly, this includes internships and part-time work and research experience and any other non-classroom experience you've had during school, as well as any volunteer work or activities or interests that help tell your story. In the Yale application, Yale SOM application, you'll see we provide a potential resume template for you to use. You are not obligated to use it. We just want to give you a starting point. It happens to be the resume that we use within our own career development office resume books that we put together for our students. So you'll have a little bit of a leg up in that process if you are already using it. But again, not intended to create extra work for you. If you already have a working resume format, feel free to go with that. What I will say is we very, very strongly recommend a one-page resume with clearly communicated work progression, start and end dates, as well as space for high-level academic experience and additional information that you choose to include. Condensing your resume to one page is a very valuable exercise in general. It really makes you home in on what is most important. About your candidacy, about the experience you've had to date, which makes it much easier then in turn for the admissions committee to identify these experience and accomplishments. I would say the only candidates who should have more than one page to their resume would be candidates with 10 or more years of work experience, which would not be as common within this program, although there's really no limitation. But again, if you have fewer than 10 years of work experience, a one-page resume is more than enough to communicate your experiences, and in fact is going to be more effective in communicating your experiences than something longer. So in terms of the content that you're going to want to focus on there, you'll focus your resume bullets not simply on a description of your jobs or the experiences that you've had, but really as an opportunity to highlight your accomplishments, your individual responsibilities, and the impact that you've achieved in each experience. So think of your resume not just as a kind of bulleted form of sort of a job description, but really as an opportunity to highlight the aspects of your experiences that you want to show off, that you want the admissions committee to know that you've been able to sort of achieve impact and strong results in the organizations that you've been a part of. A few more tips. Sorry, I'm not doing a great job of putting this up on the slide, but I will put all of that up there right now. So a few other things to remember or consider about your resume. So good tip is if you've worked for a firm that is smaller or maybe more locally or regionally known, it can be really helpful to include a brief one-line description of the organization under the organization name on your resume. If you work for a large global organization, probably not as necessary to do that. But if it's an organization that you don't think the admissions reader will be as familiar with, just again, a brief one-line description can be really helpful in just framing what this experience is. I'm going to speak a little bit now about internships, and we'll speak more about that when we jump into the work experience section. But given how many of our candidates are coming directly from undergraduate experiences, or maybe just a couple of years out, and you'll still likely want to highlight your internships, I do want to spend a little bit of time in talking about how to make sure your internships are represented accurately. So for one, you'll want to be really clear on whether your work experience was an official internship with a record of employment at the company's human resources department, or whether you're working directly for a company employee. And the experience could better be defined as maybe a part-time assistantship or something similar to that. And rest assured, we understand and we appreciate the value of each of these types of employment experiences. So don't worry about which kind of looks better on a resume. We know that valuable experience is gained through exposure that's arranged through companies in all kinds of different ways. But it is more important for you to be accurate, or it is very important for you to be accurate, as we'll be asking you to replicate this information in the work experience section of the application, which I'll show you in just a little bit. And we will ultimately use this information to verify your employment if you are admitted to the program. So again, you're going to want to make sure that you are describing your internship employment as accurately as possible. So like I said, if you're working directly for a company that will be able to verify your work, feel free to list that company. If you're being hired to either kind of shadow or directly work for an individual, you'll want to make that crystal clear as well. A couple of other tips for your resume. I would recommend considering highlighting on your resume for this program any kind of quantitative or programming skills that you use during an internship or in your job full-time or in a research experience. Given that this is a quantitatively focused program, obviously we'll be considering your academic exposure there, but it's also important for us to understand your applied skills and how you're putting these skills into practice, not just in the classroom, but in a more applied setting. Really helpful for us to see that. And so that's something you may want to emphasize on this version of your resume for programs such as ours. Also on the note of internships, if you are in an internship where receiving a return offer is a possibility, and if you've received an official return offer from an internship experience, that's a great thing to note on your resume as well. It's a sign of your performance in that experience, and it's a great thing that you may want to include there. So that's kind of talking about professional experience, but the resume is also a great place to include information about your involvement in things outside of work, as well as any certifications or coursework completed outside of your academic record. So this is the place where, if there isn't a place within our application to note something that you feel is relevant to your candidacy in the program, the resume is the place where you get to make those choices and include that information. So for example, are you currently pursuing a CFA charter? Exactly how far along are you in that process? This is something that you can choose to include within the resume. And then the last thing that I'll say on this topic is, as you can imagine, we review thousands of resumes. It does us a big favor if you can put it in a legible font with ample white space. You would be surprised how many kind of size 7 fonts with barely any white space we receive each year. Something that is legible and nicely formatted is going to be much more likely to get a close read than something that is really tough to parse out. So that's a little bit more of aesthetic advice, but it'll go a long way in highlighting the experiences that you've worked so hard in putting together. Okay, so next, I'd like to take some time and really dive into the work experience section of the application, which I really think of as a complement to your resume. It is not redundant with the resume. Again, I think of the resume as the place that you highlight the experiences and accomplishments that you really want to put forth, how you've done, and the experiences that you've garnered along the way, and really kind of show off again those accomplishments that you're most proud of. The work experience is a little bit more of the nitty-gritty detail about where you've gained those experiences. And we'll ask some very specific questions about those experiences that you wouldn't have an opportunity to showcase on the resume. So I think about these two sections as they're not redundant, they're complementary, they work hand in hand together to give us an understanding of where you have applied your knowledge and learning to date in a practical way. And so I'll go over some high-level information and tips about the work experience section, and then I will actually open up the application and show you what I'm talking about, and share my screen in a little bit more concrete terms as well after we make our way through some advice here. So this section will ask you to list out all part-time and full-time work, internships, and supervised research experiences since graduating from high school or secondary education. So nothing goes here that you did during high school. This is all your undergraduate experience and further out. So that's kind of the area of focus here. And we really feel that this detailed list of employment experiences in combination with a resume that highlights your individual responsibilities and accomplishments will give the committee a better understanding of your career path to date and your potential to thrive in the asset management industry upon graduating from the program. So again, we use these things hand in hand. So really take your time with each work experience entry. This is the section of the application that I think if you were leaving it until the night before, which I know no one who is attending this session would be doing because you're already thinking about it. But if you were leaving it to the night before, you'd probably be unpleasantly shocked by how much information we're asking you for and how much sort of time and attention it needs. So make sure you do leave that time. And really taking the time to carefully reflect on and craft your entries here, you really provide a more comprehensive and meaningful portrayal of your professional journey. We'll ask you some detailed information about each job entry, including, some basic things like the organization name, the modality of your employment. So was it primarily remote or in person? But also some things that might be, a little bit more surprising if you haven't taken the time to look through it, like how you secured your position. So that's the kind of thing that we would never see from just a resume, but we're interested in knowing. And so again, I'll open it up in a minute, but the first thing that you'll probably see in the work experience section is that there are a lot of instructions. And so I apologize a little bit for that, but they're really meant to serve as a guide as you go through the application process to make sure that you are making the most out of this section and really providing the information that's going to be most helpful to the admissions committee in understanding your experience. And so please do take the time to read through the instructions and follow them closely. And that's going to be really helpful again in helping us translate your experience. So I'll say any full-time, part-time internship or research experience that appears on your resume that happened post high school should also be input into the work experience section. I don't believe there is a limit to how many things that you can enter there. So all the relevant experiences should be put into the work experience section. Sorry, once again, I am forgetting to feed my slides here. And again, this information is what we will use to verify your work experience at the point where you're admitted and joining the school. And so you want to make sure that it is as accurate and as complete as possible. But what I think this section really does in a way that the resume doesn't necessarily help you do is connect the dots. So if you've transitioned between post-undergraduate roles, for instance, you can use the work experience entries to explain why you've left a given role and started a new opportunity. Each entry will give you a full-time entry will give you an opportunity to explain sort of why you have exited a role. Which is not something that you get to do on the resume itself. So I think of this as sort of the glue of your work experience. It gives us a little bit more detail about why you've transitioned among roles. There's also a section of the work experience page that asks you to address any gaps in work experience. And we consider this anything that is 3 months or more post-undergraduate where you have not been either in a graduate school program or full-time employed it is, I'll say for the record, it is not inherently problematic to have gaps in your work experience. There's a lot of very good reasons for why that might be the case. But rather than have the admissions committee kind of guess at what those reasons are or what that time was spent doing outside of work, you get an opportunity within the work experience section to give you that information. So with that, I am going to just take a moment here. I'm going to stop sharing this. And as I said, I'm going to open up the application itself to show you what this section looks like before I open it up for questions. Okay. So this is my test profile. So this isn't anyone's actual application, but as I mentioned, there are a lot of instructions here that you'll want to read carefully. It gives you very, very detailed information on how to make your entries as accurate as possible. If you are currently in a role, what to do about things like end dates and end salaries. Again, everything that you could possibly need to fill this out is here. There is a whole section on how to represent an internship, and it covers some of the areas that I mentioned before. But one of the most important things is, again, going to be just being straightforward about whether you were directly employed by an organization or were doing sort of informal or not formalized through HR work for an individual within an organization. Again, I can't underscore enough how important it is to accurately represent that. And then a little bit of just information about the employment verification process, because again, this information goes not only into our assessment of your application, but will then directly feed into our employment verification process for if you're admitted to the school. So you'll want to make sure that is just as, as accurate as possible. So here I'll show you what you'll actually be filling out. So I've got a couple of examples of the different types of work experience that you might have. So let's look at an example. So one of the first things you'll identify within filling out this section is the type of job that you're talking about here. And so here, this is sort of the first step in kind of identifying how to most accurately portray your work experience. So if it is full-time work, that's pretty straightforward. It's work that you're doing, as your full-time professional engagement. Part-time work, which is not meant to be internships. It's really meant to be sort of more akin to the full-time work engagements that you'd be doing, but not necessarily occupying all of your time. This could also include, work that you might be doing during your undergraduate studies that you are most likely being paid for, but is not sort of your full-time occupation. And then there's these various ways of categorizing internships. So summer internship is, pretty kind of traditional, kind of on the books experience that takes place during the summer, usually a break from your academic studies. An off-cycle internship would be something taking place most likely concurrent with your undergraduate studies, although it could also be a post-undergraduate internship experience. That is not a summer one. Part-time assistantship, and this is sometimes called different things in different places, but this would be more akin to what I was describing, where you might be working for an individual or a department, but not formally employed by an organization. And research or academic, if you're doing work for a professor or an extended kind of research experience in an academic setting, you'd categorize it there. And then I'm not really sure what would go under other, but if you really truly don't feel as though the categories that we have described here cover your work, I think 99% of the time they will, but if you feel like it's something outside of those experiences, you could place other there. So you see, we get a sense of how many hours per week did you work? And I promise you, we're not looking for people who are working 100 hours a week and kind of giving extra credit for that. It's frankly, it's a little bit less relevant for full-time work experiences and more important for things like internships or part-time, where we're just trying to get a sense of what the commitment was. And if you've had multiple experiences at once, you know, how much time you were dedicating to each. I would definitely encourage you. We're a little bit skeptical when we see someone is holding 3 internships concurrently for 40 hours a week. We are aware of how many hours are in a week and what's possible, especially while you're a student. So just make sure that those numbers are making sense and accurate for what you're actually doing. We ask you to choose your modality. It's probably frustrating that we don't have a hybrid option, but what we're really encouraging you to do is let us know what the majority of your work is. If you are a majority in the office completing a job or have, you know, a significant responsibility to come into an office, I would categorize that as in person. And if you're primarily conducting your work remotely, you'll choose the remote option. We'll ask for your, you know, fairly straightforward employment dates, your position titles. We'll ask you to categorize the sector, industry, and function that you're working in. You have lots of options here to choose from. We'll ask you to share the company website, categorize the size. So all of this may seem pretty pro forma, but it's all coming together to help us understand the context in which you completed your work. It's also really beneficial, I think, if you're not working for as well a known company. It gives us a sense of framing for your experience and kind of helps put it on more of a level playing field with companies that we might be more familiar with. And similarly, we ask universally for a company description, which again is, I think, really in particular beneficial for companies that we might be less familiar with. And again, puts everyone on level playing field, so we have just a baseline sense of the organization that you're working for. And then next, we're looking for a brief description of your role. And if you have progressed within an organization and have held a couple of different roles within a company, focus on your most recent one. But what this does is it really frees you up from having to include a job description on your resume. You can really focus your resume again on those accomplishments and the things that you've achieved rather than describing kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis. This brief description of your role is your opportunity to do that, again, to give the committee a quick framing of the work that we're viewing here. I'm not sure why it's not showing up here. It might just be because of my test account here, but ordinarily in your full-time work experience, there would also be a box asking you for your reason for departure, unless it is, of course, your current role. And this is what I shared before, is that opportunity to give us a little bit more glue to your application. So it's an opportunity to say, you know, I was looking to develop skills in another industry or another function, or I got an opportunity to work on a different sort of team than I was in currently. What is less useful to say, and we do see sometimes entered in that experience section, is things like got a new job or new opportunity presented itself. That's a little bit less informative. So try to give us a little bit of a sense of why you've made the transitions that you've had. And again, this is an opportunity that you don't really get to put together on a resume, but we want to give you the opportunity to share about your trajectory here. And then the last sort of area within adding your employment experience here is we ask you a little bit about the hiring process and how you secured your position. Again, this is above and beyond what you'd normally be able to describe on a resume, but we want to get a sense of what kind of hiring experiences you've had, how you've navigated your job search to date. And so doesn't need to be particularly long, but just give us a brief description here of how you identified the role and what the process was for securing that position. Lastly, you'll have, opportunity to identify, is there an official record of employment with the company human resources department? Here, again, we use this for employment verification purposes, and if the answer is no, we'll ask you for a professional email address and the name of your hiring manager so that we're able to contact your employer in that fashion. So that's an example of, as I said, full-time work in the case of a summer internship, and it's largely going to be the same information. But in this case, you'll be asked to enter your salary in monthly terms because that is most likely how you're being compensated if that's the case. So you'll, in full-time work, talk about annualized salary. Here it will be monthly. Once again, you'll have an opportunity to describe the company, describe your role, and also how you secured your position. So that's not very different from the full-time version. The last I'll show you here is, as I mentioned, with the part-time assistant role, so something where you're not formally employed with the organization. We give you instructions for how to enter this. So instead of listing the organization's name itself, you will list the individual. So worked for Jane Doe, Senior Vice President at part-time assistant organization. So again, making it really clear that you worked for an individual. You'll answer a lot of the same questions here, and then at the very end, here's where you will say, no, there was not an official record of employment, list the hiring manager and their official email address. So you will enter an entry for each one of your employment or internship or research experiences here. As I mentioned before, the resume section, here's where you will find the official Yale SOM resume template if you choose to use it. They'll ask you for your total months of post-undergraduate full-time work experience. Here's that section where I mentioned if you have had any gaps in work experience or if you're currently unemployed and not a student, you have the opportunity to share that information with us. And very last section here, and this won't apply to everyone, but if you are being financially sponsored by an employer or another organization or a government entity or anything like that, here's where you would share that information and comment briefly on what that sponsorship entails. So that's the work experience section. Hopefully it's fairly straightforward, but as I said, it's a little labor intensive. There's a lot of information that we ask from you in this kind of organization list. So again, my advice is just to take the time to be thoughtful about it and really think about how this works hand in hand with your resume to present your experience, and take advantage of not having to necessarily replicate a ton of information, focus the resume on highlighting your accomplishments and achievements, and focus the employment section on kind of filling in the gaps and serving as the glue to explain the transitions and trajectory that you've taken. So with that, I hope that was sort of a helpful overview of all the information that we're looking at to get to assess your professional experience and potential.